Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Creation Matters podcast, where we focus on sharing the reliability of the Bible, real science, and the gospel. I'm your host, Preston Knapp, and joining me in studio is Denton Ford. Denton, thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
Denton has been with the Creation Experience Museum for around 10 years, or getting close to that, pushing 10 years now. I think you might be our longest continuous serving. Well, no, because Curtis and Sherry have been here longer, but you're in the running for the longest continuing tour guide at the museum, I think. So,
Yep.
In other words, you've been around a long time, and you're actually younger than me. So, anyway, you are our kind of in-house dinosaur expert / nerd or whatever, however you want to title that. But you know a lot about dinosaurs.
I like them a lot.
And so last time we were kind of talking about dinosaurs and talking about what is a dinosaur and various things about them. And today we're going to continue that conversation. And so just kind of briefly give a recap of the differences between the evolutionist worldview and the biblical worldview and how they view dinosaurs.
Yeah, so kind of an evolutionary worldview would have dinosaurs, basically, starting off, it would have everything just coming from a random chance, basically. And so basically dinosaurs would just evolve from a different kind of animal, some of the other reptiles and things. And that would be somewhere around between 250, 200 million years ago, somewhere around there. And then they'd basically stay around until around 65, 66 million years ago when there's a big extinction event where either all of them would get wiped out, or sometimes they would say that most of them, and then one group kind of went on to evolve into birds that we still have around today. So a lot of times they'd say that dinosaurs aren't extinct. They're flying around the bird feeder, stuff like that. And so that's kind of an idea of what how the evolutionists see the dinosaurs. Basically a long history. We got millions of years involved. Not really any purpose or direction in it. It's just happening naturally, just kind of random chance. And so that's kind of the evolutionary idea. As far as what the Bible would say, here we have dinosaurs, they're land animals, so we would assume they'd be made on day 6 along with all the land animals. Of course, that's the same day Adam and Eve were made on, so we'd have dinosaurs living with humans right from the start. Of course, they'd be vegetarian and things, no death before sin. Of course, when Adam and Eve sinned, that changed. And by the time we get to the flood, God's judgment on people's wickedness at the time, it looks like some dinosaurs had gone carnivorous and things like that. Well, then we have the flood where we have bunches of rock layers laid down, burying these dinosaurs in a lot of them, really providing really good conditions for fossilization. And so basically for the dinosaur fossils we have, most of the dinosaurs at that time here get killed in the flood, a lot of them fossilized. And those are the ones we find today. Of course, 2 of every kind went on the ark. And so then they come off the ark and, environment's different and things. And they eventually fade out until, as far as we know, they're extinct today. So that's kind of the difference between the two. A lot of differences, I guess.
Right. And as you were kind of sharing those differences, what was kind of standing out to me is there's very big differences. The evolutionists, of course, see dinosaurs, they see all of Earth history as much longer than what the Bible would indicate. They see it as billions of years, whereas the Bible describes it as thousands of years. And dinosaurs, of course, show up hundreds of millions of years ago. They disappear many millions of years ago, whereas from a biblical standpoint, dinosaurs show up on the same day as humans, and it's not by chance. They're created, and they stay with us up until fairly recent times, which we'll talk more about that later on in the podcast. But kind of something that stood out to me in just comparing those two things is there can be an effort put forth by some perhaps well-meaning but misguided Christians who try to argue that, you can fit evolution in with the Bible. It's not that big of a difference, and we shouldn't be too dogmatic on what the Bible says. As long as we say that God did it, we can use secular science and we can try to harmonize those, which has many theological and practical problems with that approach. But even just looking at the dinosaurs, is it even possible to try to harmonize the two views that you just described about dinosaurs into one?
Well, it is interesting that people try to do that because a lot of times, you look at the Bible, there's not a whole lot of places you can insert millions of years.
Right.
Some of the places they've tried is between the first two verses for the gap theory. Sometimes they'll just try to insert it in the days of creation by saying that the days are just kind of periods of time and they're symbolic and things. Some people will just say it's all allegory or something like that up to chapter 11, different things like that. But what's really interesting is all of them particularly have one common problem. They've got boatloads of other problems individually, but one common problem that really disqualifies every one of them on its own. And that's, for one thing to notice about the dinosaurs we find today. They are dead. All of them. Like, I have not dug up a live dinosaur. Like, they're all dead, right?
That'd be cool if you did, actually, I will just say.
Yeah, that would definitely change the dig site quite a lot. The atmosphere would change. We'd be kind of a little scared to look around too much at that point. But it's interesting also that not only are the dinosaurs dead, but there's also quite a lot that are found with evidence of predation on them. We've got tooth marks, stuff like that. Even times where, what was it? Was it a hadrosaur maybe? Somebody was showing me out in Montana that it was either in, I think it was Edmontosaurus, I think it might have been in the skull, part of the skull. It actually had the tip of a T-Rex tooth stuck in the skull.
Oh.
And so, tooth marks and things like that kind of, okay, they were definitely eating each other. They weren't real friendly. There's also been evidence of diseases, bone diseases, cancers, things like that, arthritis on some of these dinosaurs. So putting all that together, we've got dead things that were eating each other and had diseases. And now we were going to try to put the idea that that was over many millions of years and things, and that was before humans came along with the Bible. There's a problem because the Bible makes it very clear that death was a consequence of sin. Animals eating each other obviously includes death. Diseases are part of are a result of sin. They're not a very good part of God's creation. And it's interesting. You think about it, at the end of the creation, God says it's all very good.
Right.
If we mix the two together some way, then we've got God telling Adam and Eve, or I guess not telling them, but basically proclaiming this as very good while Adam and Eve are standing there on top of sedimentary layers with just packed full of dead stuff. Evidence of predation, evidence of diseases and stuff. And so it's interesting because then death is not the consequence of sin, and it's actually a very good part of God's creation. That really provides some theological problems in a major way.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, another reason that I've encountered as to why people try to blend the two, try to blend secular science along with the Bible, is because they feel like that the Bible is in conflict with science. And they don't want that to be the case, so they consider science fact, so now they're going to try to bring the Bible into conformity to that fact. Well, we're going to get into maybe a little bit of the nitty-gritty on some of that to show that actually real science is not in conflict with Scripture. It actually supports it. And, you've I failed to mention this in the intro, but, you have dug personally on some dinosaur bones. You've dug on footprints, dinosaur tracks and things, and you've been on multiple fossil digs. And so you can speak to this not just from an intellectual level, but on I've seen what a fossil dig site looks like. So explain some of the evidence for the rapid burial of these dinosaurs, or actually maybe better to back up before we talk about that specifically. How is a fossil formed? Just kind of briefly bring us up to speed on that.
Oh, okay. So that's a pretty important thing because a lot of times people have this vague idea in their mind that fossils, they're old, right? Now, it is interesting. There's some people that would define a fossil as something that's at least 10,000 years old. Well, then I would basically conclude, well, if that's the case, there are no fossils from a biblical worldview. And so obviously I'm using a different definition than that. But basically, more common definition, it's preserved remains of something, in the ground and stuff like that, that isn't real new, I guess. Kind of the idea. But a lot of times people have the idea that, okay, a fossil, it's something that, some dinosaur dies, lays on the ground for a while. Over years, everything rots away and you just got bones, and it slowly gets covered by sediments. And eventually over, thousands of years, maybe the thing eventually is a fossil, and this thing is ancient. Well, it's interesting. Really, fossilization doesn't have to do with time so much as just the right conditions. And now, of course, what fossilization actually is, there's different types of fossilization. You've got permineralization, which is very common, especially with the dinosaur bones, where basically the pores are filled with minerals. Basically, it's permeated by minerals. So sometimes you'll have some of the original bone mineral there and stuff, and it's just permeated. Sometimes you'll have petrification, where it goes to the next step and it just replaces everything, and kind of like petrified wood, where it is really just rock. There's none of the original stuff left there. Then you got molds and casts, where you'll have something that just dissolves away, but the cavity where it was is still there, and it gets filled with rock or something like that. So there's various types of fossils that way. But basically, it's the conditions, really, that are key to making a fossil, not exactly the time. It's really interesting. There's some places in the world where people could especially see this, where especially places where there's like a spring or a seep or something that's putting out really, really mineral-packed water. There's a place over in England where it's pretty interesting. For years, they've been actually hanging things in this drip line. Basically, there's a spring, goes to a little creek, drips over a little waterfall, packed full of minerals, and they hang teddy bears there. And you can get a teddy bear to permineralize in just months, a matter of months, 6 months, I think, for a bigger one. There's a place over in the Czech Republic, I think, where they had take little paper roses and stick them in some kind of spring, and they get all permineralized and things. I think down in Tasmania there was a mine where they abandoned the mine, and a guy left a felt hat down there sitting in the water. About 40 years later, it was permineralized, permeated by minerals. Of course, with that, where it's just being, months or a few decades, a lot of times it's a little different in that, some of the, more soft materials are more preserved too, because it hasn't actually rotted all away.
Well, sure.
Whereas with a lot of fossils, a lot of the organic stuff is going to be gone over, a few thousand years or something. But it's still the same kind of process that we see with fossils. And so, yeah, with fossils, it's basically preserving something by mineralizing it, but it's all about conditions, not necessarily time.
And do we have the kind of conditions today to cause mass fossilization like what we see in the fossil record?
Not really. We have conditions in really unique places to make fossils occasionally. Think about tar pits and stuff, where you might still have squirrels getting stuck out there and sinking in and being preserved. But as far as compared to what we see, the widespread, vast numbers of fossils, huge sediment layers, just millions and billions of fossils and stuff, we don't have anything that can do that. Like, we don't have any natural processes working today that can do anything close to it. It's, if fossilization happens, it's incredibly rare, incredibly unique circumstances. And it's today's processes don't really explain what we see very well.
So then from that perspective, the evolutionary explanation for all the fossils that we see is it has a rough start from the get-go, just because, well, if we had billions of fossils formed in the past, why don't we see any fossils happening today? Maybe there's a different explanation that better fits that. Obviously, as Bible-believing Christians, we would say, well, the flood gives a excellent mechanism for fossilization. Maybe explain why. Why is it that the flood is kind of the go-to position for creationists in explaining fossils?
Well, basically because another thing about fossilization is you can't really just, I think as Ken Ham has said it before, you lay a dead cat on the grass, you're not going to get a fossil. Right? It takes specific conditions. Some of those conditions are rapid burial. Things need to be buried deep enough to where other things can't dig them out, where they can't get them out themselves. You need to have the right conditions around it, not having oxygen and stuff. You need to have a lot of minerals seeping through and stuff. So there's a lot of specific conditions you need. And the interesting thing is, while those conditions are really, really rare in just normal conditions today, they're basically the exact conditions of Noah's flood we would expect. You have water rushing up over the continents and things. That would be picking up bunches of sediment and things, laying them down in layers. It would explain the sedimentary rock layers really well. And then, of course, all the stuff that got buried in there, you've got rapid burial, which, of course, we've got specific fossils that really show that. And then we've got, having things buried really deep, lots of minerals and stuff, just really good conditions for fossilization. So I think that's why, we would point to the flood. It's like that is like the ideal event to explain the fossils. Sure.
And again, just to clarify, when we talk about the global flood, some people have the idea that, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and so they think of it kind of like overflowing your bathtub. The water level just kind of gradually rises until it, spills over. But that's actually not the picture painted in Scripture. It talks about the fountains of the great deep bursting open. Scientists have found water, large, I think they say it's somewhere between 3 to 7 times as much water that's under our Earth as what's in our oceans today. And, we have the cracks, the tectonic plates and things where these fountains opened up. And so you're having water coming up in a very violent manner, in a very catastrophic way, like you said, picking up that sediment, rushing in over the land, depositing it fast and thick. So that very, very different view than just kind of, overflowing the swimming pool or something.
Mm-hmm. And along with some of the ways that people would try to put the Bible and evolution together, there's been people that have said, the flood was just very tranquil, very calm. Oh. And it's like, it is extremely hard to get a worldwide flood to do that. That's not how it works.
Right. So what evidence do we see with dinosaur fossils that they were buried rapidly?
So that's pretty interesting. One thing that is quite common among dinosaur fossils, of course, particularly the ones that are articulated, the ones that are actually, the bones are still together. A lot of what's found is disarticulated, where you've just got random bones laying around. But the ones that are articulated, they're in kind of their life pose still somewhat. A lot of them are in what people often refer to as the death pose, where they basically have their head way back over their basically over their back sometimes. And it's fairly common. And people have wondered, could that have been, they were drowning, they were trying to get out of the water, somebody had the idea that maybe lightning was striking the water and they were getting electrocuted. But also, if you look at animals today sometimes, as things die quickly, they'll kind of go into that pose. But it definitely seems that pose kind of would fit with this rapid burial, drowning, being killed in a flood, something like that. Another thing, especially sometimes with dinosaurs and other fossils, that supports the idea of rapid burial are fossils that are kind of caught in action, in a sense. And there's some really cool ones. There's the one kind of famous fighting dinosaur specimen from over in Mongolia in the Gobi Desert. There's a velociraptor and a protoceratops, and it looks like they're just having it out. They've got claws and teeth into each other and stuff. And, of course, if they were fighting and got buried in that pose, of course, it would make sense, if that was rapid burial.
Sure.
a lot more than just that they both gave each other the killer blow at the same time and just died and sat there in position. Slowly got covered by sediments. Or as one theory was that a sand dune fell on them. Not really sure how that works.
Sand dune fell on them.
Not totally sure how that works. I'm not an expert on deserts, but it definitely seems a lot less likely than getting caught in maybe more of a wave or something like that. Would seem to tend to catch things in their position a little better. But then there's other ones. Of course, those are we got dinosaurs. We got also other fossils. I know out in Kansas, the Sternberg Museum out in Hays, Kansas, they've got a really nice specimen of a huge fish. It's 12, 13 feet long, I think, something like that, called a Zophactinus. I tried to spell that one right. It's a really, really crazy spelling on that one. But it's really interesting because it's the full fish, fully articulated, but it's got a 6-foot-long fish inside of it that is not digested. That definitely fits the idea of rapid burial. There's also been different specimens where there's actually been a fish with his mouth open, another fish sticking out of its fish tail sticking out of its mouth, where he just about got him and got caught in the act. Apparently, there's also one of the marine reptiles, the ichthyosaur. Those ones that look a little bit more like fish. There's actually one that was found in the process, it looks like, of giving birth.
Wow.
Which you would hope wouldn't last for millions of years.
Yeah, I would hope not.
But that's definitely an action shot there. And also the fact that there are just tons and tons of clams that are found closed. Which is interesting because when clams die, they have one main muscle keeping them closed. And basically when they die, they open up.
Sure.
So basically they had to be buried quickly, buried alive, basically. They can burrow out of mud pretty well. So they had to be pretty deep too.
So it would be the position that we find these fossils in and maybe some of the activities that they're engaged in that would suggest a rapid burial.
Yeah. Of course, along with the fact that we have fossils. Because
I was going to bring that up, actually. Because we hit armadillos and deer out here on our highways, and they can be in distressful positions, as they're laying there along the road, but they don't generally become a fossil.
Yeah.
So...
Other processes take over.
Right. So, the very fact that we have fossils is evidence of rapid burial. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So maybe somebody's saying, okay, I could see how rapid burial maybe describes these animals being preserved better than the idea that they just laid out there. But how do we know that they were buried a short time ago as opposed to a long time ago? Kind of maybe bringing up the ruin and reconstruction theory too, kind of along with that. Some people view Scripture as, well, there were multiple catastrophes. Noah's flood wasn't the only time God brought judgment. He had multiple catastrophes, and how that fits in somehow with the geological column. But what would be some of the evidence that, no, actually these fossils were made not all that long ago? Yeah,
so there's some really interesting stuff as far as the multiple catastrophes thing. One of the big problems I always think of is, if we had a flood back before Genesis 1 verse 2 or something like that, and that was supposed to have formed all these fossils and stuff, well, Noah's flood would have ripped it up and redistributed it, so kind of we wouldn't have evidence of that. So it's kind of a thing where it kind of shoots itself in the foot, that theory, because there's another flood that would mess all that up. But as far as stuff, specifically the dinosaurs, I think that really supports the younger age of just thousands of years, about 4,500 years, somewhere around there since the flood. For one thing, first off, I would like to point out, I've never found a fossil that had a label on it. They don't come labeled. They don't have some really easy way where it's just like, oh, this is how old I am. And things. It's interpreted through our worldview. There's not just some obvious way that it's telling us how old it is. There's lots of interpretation that goes into it. Even the radiometric dating techniques and stuff they might use on rocks and things. There's a lot of interpretation that goes into that, a lot of assumptions based on what you already believe. And so it's not just a cut and dry thing of that scientists are saying dinosaurs are millions of years old. Well, they tested them, obviously, right? It's not quite like that. You don't just, go up there and just put your age meter on the bone and be like, oh, that's what it is, right? It doesn't just pop up on the display. And so it's not such a solid thing in that when we're dealing with the past, we have a lot of interpretation. But another thing that is really fascinating that I think has a lot to do with how old they are is soft tissue and like biomaterials found in dinosaur fossils.
And that's something that the public doesn't know a whole lot about. I have found, especially giving tours, that a lot of people are kind of surprised when I mention that, we have found soft tissue in dinosaur bones before.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where used to it was like, hey, they found soft tissue in a T-Rex femur. And now it's like, yeah, there's around 52 papers been published on various, specifically dinosaur soft tissue. Of course, that's just the latest that I had seen on the list.
Wow, 52.
I don't know if they had updated the list for a little while. But, of course, there's a whole lot more than that on other fossils. But it has actually become I think Dr. Mark Armitage, he's been studying that a whole lot. And he made the prediction. He thinks that it's actually probably the norm that a lot of dinosaur fossils, maybe most dinosaur fossils, have soft tissues. Of course, that's kind of his prediction. We'll see. But so far, they just find more and more and more. And it's amazing the variety. We got collagen, blood cells, blood vessels, things like that, soft, stretchy stuff. Even, it looks like possibly evidence of intact DNA. Very, very fragmentary, like a little bit. Nothing that we could actually ever do anything with.
But I was going to ask, so does that mean Jurassic Park could actually become a reality?
Oh, yeah. Basically, it was in a baby Hypacrosaurus skull and I think it was in some cartilage. They found a couple cells that were in really good shape. And they put a dye. They had two different dyes that they would put on it that would react with basically the structure of DNA. If there were at least 6 base pairs.
Oh, 6.
Yeah, so they reacted with something in the nucleus of the cells. And then, of course, they had a control group. They did it on an ostrich cell, too, and it basically looked very similar. And so it looks like there's very good evidence that there was actually intact DNA. Of course, at least 6 base pairs. So that's not really saying much as far as being able to read anything when you think of the millions of base pairs in the DNA. But at the same time, DNA is really fragile.
Exactly.
It is not something you'd expect to last for very long. I know there was some scientists that used Moa bones to actually come up with a half-life for DNA, basically how long DNA should be able to last. Now, I think their number might be a little off because they were working from a different worldview. I think they were saying the oldest bones they had were 8,000 years old. Of course, that doesn't match a biblical timeline. So I'm thinking, okay, that's probably going to mess up their half-life just a little bit. But they came up with the idea, basically, the calculations that at the max, you could not have intact DNA past, I think it was 6.8 million years.
6.8, okay.
Now, it's interesting because the dinosaurs were supposed to have all died out, 65 million years ago, something like that. 6.8 is a whole lot less than that.
That is, for sure.
So to find evidence of intact DNA in a dinosaur bone, that's pretty big stuff. Of course, collagen is a really tough protein. Like it's something that, okay, if one's going to last, it's going to be collagen, right? That's what makes up a lot. That's one of the big components of your bones and stuff. Well, what's really interesting is I think Dr. Brian Thomas with ICR has done a lot of research on how long collagen can last. And from what he found, basically it wouldn't even get up very close to 1 million years for collagen, the tough one. That kind of tells us about the other ones that aren't quite so tough, I guess. And so I think things like that they really match the biblical timescale so well.
Yeah, definitely fits in better with the biblical explanation than this idea of millions of years ago laying out in the open, not being buried rapidly and that sort of thing. So even given from the evolutionist perspective, it would be unideal conditions for preservation, I guess, when you really understand how fossilization happens. So when we find these dinosaur fossils, what kind of changing gears a little bit here. As far as feathered dinosaurs, because, that's kind of the other explanation of what happened to the dinosaurs that didn't die off and whatever that mass extinction was. I heard they kind of gave up on the meteor story, but anyway.
There's a lot of theories, I think.
So then, have we actually ever found a feathered dinosaur fossil?
Well, it's interesting because there have been feathered fossils found, and there have been fuzzy fossils found, and there have been fossils with lines next to them. Is kind of how I would put it. There have been ones that have been found that have true feathers, pennaceous feathers, I would say, basically the full flight feathers. And the more we look at those, it looks like those are probably actually birds. Now, sometimes they're kind of weird, like where they might have actually true teeth, or in some other little differences where they're not like most birds. But sometimes I know some of those features, like claws on their wings and stuff. We have a bird down in South America, the Huatzing, that actually has that as a juvenile. And I think ostriches have claws on their wings and things. So there's some things where it's like, okay, well, these are just strange birds, but they would definitely fit in the bird category. There's other ones that are kind of, that we find them with a bit of a fuzzy outline. And people kind of take that as, it has proto-feathers. Basically, it's on its way to becoming feathers. Basically, they call it proto-feathers because it's just looks like hair. It's not feathers. It doesn't look like feathers. They've kind of hijacked that word to mean things that really aren't feathers. It'd be more accurate if they were going to just call it fur, I guess. But there also seems to be good evidence on some of those that it actually could be frayed collagen fibers. Basically, as the thing decays, basically some of the collagen fibers down in the skin and stuff kind of frayed. There seems to be a lot of evidence that actually could be that instead. And there's other ones where it might just be a little line or something like that. But since people are already on this thing of a lot of dinosaurs having feathers, they're looking for it a lot. And it seems to have kind of been the thing. If you want to be in, that's kind of the thing to believe. And so it gets promoted a whole lot more and not questioned very much. But really, when you look at them, a lot of times it's like, well, okay, yeah, that one's a bird. This one, that doesn't really count as feathers. It's not much to go by. And then when you look at all of its anatomical features overall, it's definitely not a bird. Things about with its tail, length of its tail. Theropod dinosaurs, they have really long tails. You compare some of these ones that they're putting feathers on and stuff, and sometimes it'll be like, well, that one shouldn't have feathers, right? It's got a really long tail, unlike a bird. And then there's ones where it's like, well, yeah, that has a pretty short tail, lot less vertebrae and things, and that actually would fit a bird kind of a category. And then you look at its shoulders and things, and that is more of a bird setup. Its wrists, it's got the swivel wrists, for wings, and it's like, well, I think this is a bird. And so we don't really find the in-between forms. We find some strange birds, but I don't think we really found the transitional form that they're talking about, kind of this idea that the dinosaurs evolved into birds, and we've got these in-between forms. I think a lot of that is just kind of they're expecting to find it, and so they kind of just put feathers on their dinosaurs.
And it might be good to touch on the motivation that's not driven so much by ideology, but by personal promotion to find new species of dinosaurs or a transitional form. Do scientists have incentive to do something like that?
Yeah, sometimes, it's kind of an accomplishment, I would think, to find something new, to get to name something especially. And so there's people that definitely think that there's too many species of dinosaurs, where it's like, well, this one's just a younger one of that or something like that. There are problems like that. But then you think about an evolutionary transition. Well, that's an even bigger deal, I would think. And so it would seem like there's potentially, some motivation to call it that. Not that most of them are probably not, just going out there and lying to the public like, sure, I'm going to get famous with this one. But sometimes it might kind of influence kind of how the research goes and stuff.
So no pun intended. It sounds like feathered dinosaurs is a little fuzzy.
Yep.
Anyway, well, what would be some of the other complications with a dinosaur evolving into a bird? Because they do seem like very different animals.
They are. Overall, in their body plan, there's some superficial similarities. They both stand on two legs. Some of the theropod dinosaurs and that the evolutionists would say evolved into birds. They got the same, stand on two legs, little, smaller arms or something like that. But there's a lot of differences. For one thing, you think about the difference between feathers and scales. Feathers are incredibly complex. They come out of a follicle. They've got all the little hooks and barbs and things, even down to a microscopic level. You got scales, just a fold in the skin. They'd have to change their respiratory system. Birds' respiratory system is pretty unique, very efficient in things. That'd kind of be a big deal to change that. Their bones would have to change. They'd have to get flight muscles. You look at some of these theropod dinosaurs, and this is like, yeah, they are not ready to start flapping, right? Especially think about a T-Rex or something like that. A lot of them, they have the big legs and little arms kind of a thing, and that's kind of the opposite of what you need for flight.
Sure.
Of course, even if you think about stuff like, these birds having a preening gland. It's like, where would that start? Just, okay, finally evolved feathers. You know what? I just feel like I need to, stick my nose back on my back now and just get some oil and start preening, just like some of the things where their behavior, their instincts, everything would just have to change. And it kind of all have to happen together. You don't just do it gradually and have it really help the thing survive. And so huge problems, huge differences between these two. I think sometimes people look at a superficial resemblance between things and think, it could evolve. But when you really look at the anatomy and stuff, what's actually going on there, there's a huge amount of stuff that has to change. And it makes it a really big problem for the idea of evolution there.
Yeah. So if the evolutionary worldview has trouble explaining where dinosaurs came from, it seems to have trouble explaining then what happened to the dinosaurs. They're still looking for a good theory as to why most of them went extinct. The evolving into birds theory has obvious problems. And they don't even really have a good explanation for how the dinosaurs could have been preserved as a fossil. It sounds like maybe evolution isn't the best way of explaining the scientific facts that we actually see when it comes to dinosaurs.
Yeah, it has a lot of trouble explaining much about them, really. But yeah, you think about that, like, they fit the Bible so well. Even the whole feathered dinosaurs thing. It's like, here we've got all these differences between them, all these problems and stuff. Bible says birds are made on day 5, dinosaurs made on day 6, land animals made on day 6. Different days even. I think it's so interesting how we've got, creation, it matches what we see. We've got the flood explaining the fossils and things. So much just right there in Genesis, just it makes sense with what we see. We can trust it. Like it's reliable. It's authoritative. And really when we base our worldview on that and interpret evidence through it, things make so much more sense. But then you think about it, here we can trust the beginning of the story. Well, that tells you something about later on in the story, right? In the Bible. Mm-hmm. You look at where here it's telling the truth when it talks about how God created everything perfect. We sinned, messed it up, and we were separated from our Creator. Of course, He designed us to have a relationship with Him. Here we messed that up. And then we've got a whole bunch of the rest of the Bible preparing us, working up to where finally it tells us about how God Himself actually came to this earth. Of course, that was Jesus, became fully God, fully man, and then went and died for us, taking our punishment. So if we repent and believe in Him, we can actually have the relationship He designed us for right from the start, which is really the most amazing thing to think about. Like it was amazing, God created everything and how He directed history and all that. But I think it's incredibly amazing that after we messed everything up, here He came and made a way for us to be reconciled to Him. Just mind-blowing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Denton, I've enjoyed this conversation that we've had about dinosaurs, and there's actually probably more that we could cover on this, so we'll have to come back and revisit the subject sometime.
Sounds good.
All right, and thank you all for listening. to the Creation Matters podcast. We are a outreach of the Creation Experience Museum located here in Branson, Missouri. We give free guided tours where we walk through Earth's history from a biblical perspective, talk about science and how God's Word and God's world fit together. So if you'd like to come, we would highly encourage that. We would also encourage you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Just look up Creation Experience Museum, and you can stay updated on us as a ministry, as well as find when new podcasts come out. And if you'd like to book your tour, because sometimes we can have long lines, and if you are running a tight schedule or you want to get an amazing tour guide like Denton, you can try to show up on the right day of the week and get him, and you can ask him all kinds of dinosaur questions. Then you might want to visit our website at creationexperiencemuseum.com. Thank you all for listening again, and I'd like to also thank Caleb and Cassie for their help behind the scenes. Join us again next time as we will continue to focus on the reliability of the Bible, real science, and the gospel.